Okay. Good evening,
Hi,
Elena.
Renee.
How are you?
Hi. Oh, good, good. Thank you.
That's lovely to see you. And thank you very much for your wonderful talk last week on what moves you. I think it gave us quite a lot for us to consider and to reflect upon. We have had various questions come in, and we can discuss after each question as well. But I'll kick straight off on the questions. You mentioned that human beings are mostly moved by worldly attractions, as well as fear and the need for self-preservation. Why does fear have such a strong influence on our actions? And how can we overcome this fear, or possibly even fear itself? You know, is it just one fear? Is there something underlying it? What is that? What are your thoughts there?
Well, first of all, we might examine fear. Fear is not specific to humans alone. If we watch animals and nature, we would notice that fear is there instinctively in animals, and they demonstrate it with a fight or flight mechanism, right? I watch the birds here in Crotona, and sometimes when we come close, then they all quickly fly away. There is that sense of an instinct for self-preservation, or a sense of survival, right? Anything that might be perceived to be a threat is either going to make them run away, or they will fight if really threatened. So fear is there. And even botanists would say that plants also respond when there are threats. They respond in various ways. So this fear, we might see, is really very much related to the need for self-preservation and the instinct for life. So there is this inherent desire in all creatures to exist, to live, to express themselves to the fullest, to be what they're meant to be. And if we trace where this desire for existence comes from, we can find that it goes all the way back to that desire to manifest, the desire which is known as Kamadeva. This is maybe a strange way to start answering this question, but Kamadeva in Hinduism comes from the two words Kama, which is desire, and Deva is God. So it's like an anthropomorphic way to describe this force towards expression, towards manifestation, towards coming into being. And it is universal. It is based on an all-embracing impetus to be, and it is present even in Pralaya.
Yeah.
And it is what makes Pralaya end, so that manifestation can begin. So in nature, we see this desire or impulse towards creation, preservation, and destruction everywhere, a cyclic process, right? That leads to greater and greater expression of that one life in everything. In everything, then, there's that desire to, well, I said that already, a desire for self-preservation.
Yeah.
And but it's different for animals in a way. In animals, you see that even though there is fear in them, when they are ready to die, they don't fight it. They somehow go away to some corner of the field, somewhere far away, to lay down and die quietly in peace.
That is what they do. You notice it with your dogs as well. They want to be on their own, and they want that they know instinctively, don't they, inside, that this is what's happening.
Yes. In humans, it's a little different. We get upset when we know we might be dying, and there's that initial fear, but also the anger until we finally, the stages of dying, right? Until we finally come to an acceptance. And that is because in humans, we don't have just the instinct for survival. That this desire to be is coupled with, well, we have, okay, first of all, I should say that divine desire in humans is manifested as our fourth principle, karma. But it is usually, karma is always linked with manas, kama manas. And this kama manas is related to that sense of I-ness, that separate I, which has the attachments and the desire for stimulus, the desire to gratify cravings, which is different from animals. Animals, when they're full, they go away and they don't need to eat anymore. And humans, we tend to want to eat. Because if it's good, we eat more than we need. So in humans, it manifests differently because of the presence of manas. And I think this is where the problem happens. Your question was, why is, how did you say that? Why does fear have a strong influence? Yes. So in the highest, in the higher levels, this kama is it's an all-embracing principle that's based on love. And when it is a downward pointing force, as it is manifested in humans, it is that kama manas, kamic nature, that is associated with clinging, cravings,
attachment.
Yes, the attachments. And then comes the fear of losing and the fear of not being in control, for example. And because of that fear, then we need to acquire more that will give us something that will give us more sense of security, more sense of self, even. And that's why in us, I think fear is a much stronger force than in animals. And the selfish actions then become the norm because of this identification with a separate self. Animals have more of that group soul kind of mentality, whereas we have self-consciousness and we become very identified with our physical form, our physical bodies, which is a separate self, which is separate from others. And this is what consequently leads to a lot of the actions that are selfish and even evil and bring endless suffering. How can we overcome this fear, or fear itself, you asked? I would say awareness. Awareness would be key. But awareness also has different levels. I'm sure all of you in New Zealand are familiar with the self-transformation trainings about how to overcome fear, right? So that is one type of awareness. Remember how we would be asked to imagine the object that we are afraid of and face that fear. And, you know, we do our breathing, we become aware of our bodily reactions to the object of fear until finally the fear dissipates or goes away. But then there's another kind of awareness that can be practiced. Krishnamurti would call it a choiceless awareness, wherein there is no judgment. So we're not deciding, I like this, I don't like that, or this is good and that is bad. This is just being aware of what is there without any judgment. And that kind of awareness, in that kind of awareness, fear also would disappear, because we're not saying that this is good for me and that is not.
It just
And
is
then,
that way, really, isn't it? It just
yes,
is.
it's just an acceptance of whatever is there
Yeah.
without judgment. And
Mm.
then, of course, there's the other kind of awareness wherein, and Krishnamurti often speaks of this kind of awareness where you, looking at a tree, for example, or an animal, you become aware of the essence that is in the tree. And what really is that essence? You find by deeper examination that it is also the same essence that is in us and that is in everything. So when we get to a more universal view of life, where now the separateness, a sense of separateness disappears, fear has no more place. Fear disappears because fear is related to us, to the separate self. If we can bring our perception to become more universal, then I think that is a good way to overcome fear. Um, you know, the divine desire, divine love is deep inside each one of us, and we have a choice. We can choose whether we would gravitate more towards the lower expression of that or the more universal or higher expression of that. And if we can step back to see a bigger picture, see our place in it, see the place of everything in it, and then notice that somehow everything is part of one whole, then I think fear will
Dissipate somehow. Yeah.
dissipate and eventually be overcome. Sorry, it's a long answer for.
That's all right. But that's what theosophy is about, really, is seeing that bigger perspective, isn't it? That universal view rather than the small view where it's I, me, my, and the purifying of our emotions and our mind. That is what helps carry us into that larger view, isn't it? That side of things. So yeah. Thank you. I know that was a curly question. So that was the first one. I thought, definitely. It also points towards, and something you spoke about in your talk, seeking that which is more permanent rather than which is, I think HPB would use the term evanescent or transitory. Yeah. And that shows the importance of that because it's going to have an effect over a much longer period, isn't it, than just this one life. I could get myself this and this, but when I pass, those things go. Whereas if I choose to work on where my perceptions are and so forth with that, that's looking at a longer view if you choose to be a little bit more universal or to see things broadly. In that way. So the importance of what's more permanent, isn't it, really, rather than temporary as such. Yeah. Okay, now let's have a look. Actually, one other comment I wrote with that question was when researched individuals, we have to find that out ourselves, don't we? No one else is going to do that for us, nor can they do that for us. That's our journey as such. Isn't it?
Yes. Can you tell me again what's the question there?
It's not really a question, really. It was
just asking for my comment.
Yeah, just really that's our humanness, isn't it? To wake up, to kind of know who we are and to work this out. I mean, that's part of the path, isn't it? Yeah, as such.
Yes, definitely. And the choice is really very individual.
Yeah.
No one can make a choice for us. And the choice will be different for every person. So because we all see things differently, but that's the strength of our diversity.
Yeah.
That we all see different aspects of something. And our actions would be dependent on how we perceive it. And sometimes that works for the better because we all have different approaches and one approach is not sufficient. More approaches would be probably be more appealing to a greater whole, because people will not necessarily gravitate to just one approach.
That's right. It's, well, everyone's unique, aren't they, in the way they are. So really catering for more when you are more broad as such. Mm-hmm. So yeah, thank you. That was wonderful. Now I'm going to jump to our next question. How can we be sure of what direction we have to move in, and how do we know what the right thing to do is? I love that.
That almost goes back to your previous statement. You know, I thank you for that question, because it is something that I also always think about. In our lives, in our everyday lives, there are always these scenarios where we have to make a choice. What is the best thing to do? And it is always difficult to decide what is the best way, what is the right action, because sometimes two different ways both seem right. Mm-hmm. Or one may seem more difficult, but maybe is more correct. But what does correct mean? You know, so I've thought about how do you decide what is right action? Radha had a very simple statement. Mrs. Radha Bernier, our former international president, she said, right action is that which unites.
Well, that's a lovely response there.
Yes, isn't that resonates? Yes, that which unites. Yeah. And then Annie Besant said, right action is that which is based on love. Mm-hmm. So if you're moved by love, then your action has to be right, because it is impersonal and it is for the good of the other. And, you know, sometimes we may also ask ourselves, well, when action is based on what is for the advancement of the higher life, how can it be wrong?
That's right. Yeah.
And so there are all these nice general guidelines that we might be able to use to decide what is right action, that which unites, that which is based on love and on harmony, on sympathy, that which leads to the upliftment of the greater life. You know, in practice, though, it's still not so simple as just using these guidelines, because it's never black and white. There's always a big gray area there where discrimination has to come in. Yes. So what else can we use to decide what we should do? I was thinking that maybe knowing what our duty is, what our dharma is. In the Gita, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna had that very difficult dilemma, a decision. Do I go to war and potentially kill my relatives, or do I put down my arms and do nothing, put down the weapons and do nothing out of compassion? Mm-hmm. So, well, in truth, even doing nothing is still an act.
An action, isn't it?
It's still, it's still a choice. It's still an action. So the advice that Arjuna got was follow your dharma. What is your dharma? And it therefore begs the question of knowing ourselves and knowing what our purpose in our life is, and acting from that place in the most harmonious and kindest way possible. We were speaking earlier. Oh, did you have another question?
I was just going to say that kindness, it's such a thing that everyone can relate to if they realize it's not always hugely difficult. Sometimes it's just being centered, isn't it, in your own heart and being kind and thinking along those tracks. But once again, it's always, you still have to make a decision, don't you? There's no getting out of it. That's our human, that's our lot in a way, isn't it? Now carry on, Elena. What were you going to say there? You're going to go somewhere else.
Well, I told you before that Jeffrey would always have the children come and he would give us some little teachings. And one that has stuck is the statement, always be kinder than the situation demands.
Oh, that's nice. That's
always err on the side of kindness, basically.
I remember it must have been one of his students had said, someone told me that never, when they were talking about gossip, and he said, never say anything behind anyone's back. The only thing you should do behind someone's back is pat it. You know, I remember that quite clearly. And, you know, it's very good advice, and it's just being kind, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Hindsight, of course, is always a wonderful thing, but we don't have that when we're often making decisions. So, yeah. So thanks, Elena. Now, this next question is quite long, so I'll just read through it slowly. When trying to live a life according to universal values or spiritual principles, it is not always easy, as others look upon you as being a bit weird and often don't understand. It can be lonely at times, and you can feel disconnected from those around you. How does one continue to live in a world without being pulled into its conditioned culture?
Okay. The first thought that came to mind is I may not be the best person to answer this, because I kind of always viewed myself as a bit weird anyway. You know, always a bit different from the others. And then thinking a little bit more closely about it, everyone is actually a little bit weird in some ways. We all, because we're all kind of different. Growing up, it seems that it was also kind of a badge of honor to dare to be different, to be unconventional in some ways, and it takes courage to do so. So I'll give you an example. Because I became vegetarian when I was a child, growing up in a society that didn't know about vegetarianism, and a time when it was really not accepted or unheard of even. Yeah. So I always had to bring my own food to school. And even when I started working, I always had to bring my own food. And people would always ask me what I was eating and why I didn't want the regular food, and why I didn't want to eat the real food. Because when it didn't have meat, it was not real food. Basically, that is how people thought. And but I was never embarrassed about it, because it was, for me, the most natural thing growing up in a family of vegetarians. But I took it always as a chance to talk about, let's say, a reverence for life. And you know, maybe those people I was speaking to didn't really understand what I meant by a reverence for life. And yes, there would be some argumentation about, well, aren't you killing plants when you eat plants?
These people say that, don't they?
Yes, they do. But then you never know when these little seeds that get planted along the way eventually may bear fruit. Yeah, so I had a colleague who prided himself on being a gourmet cook, and couldn't understand why I would not eat meat. But then one day he came to me and said, I'm thinking of becoming a vegetarian. And it was not for the reasons that I had given about ahimsa and all that. It was more for health reasons. But just because of the exposure to a vegetarian, he realized it's doable.
Yeah.
So in some ways, our difference becomes sometimes an inspiration for others.
Yeah.
And so it's one way of looking at it. I do understand that in family situations and in relationships, um, trying to live a spiritual life, for example, where it is not accepted or seen to be strange, can be very, very difficult, very challenging. I know of one woman whose spouse, whose husband and children thought that she had joined some kind of cult because what she was talking about was not what the church was teaching. And a man this time who had to do his readings in secret because the family thought that he had gone into some kind of devil worship. The occultism was some kind of devil worship. So I do understand that it can be very painful, difficult, isolating sometimes. And it does take courage. It may entail a lot of heartache, leading a life that is not accepted or that is strange.
Yeah, that is just different from how you brought up or what's around you, isn't it? It's just part of it.
To the accepted norm, different from the norm. Yes.
Yeah.
But I remember also Sri Ram said, we must all find our own way in life, and only we can decide for ourselves.
That's the second time that's come up. The decisions lie with us, don't they? We said in some of those earlier questions that being human, there is choice, isn't there? It's not like it's instinct, like an animal will often act from an instinct. We need to weigh up things. We need to, as you said, be courageous at times, different things. But that choice seems to always be there, and it can be stressful, even knowing that, I've got to make a choice with this or whatever. So, just being human, really, isn't it? So, yeah.
Did I answer the question?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. You more than answered it. So that's lovely. Now, where's my, wait there, that's the big question. I've got one last question. What are the important first steps to take when wishing for inner change? Think back, Elena.
Well, first of all, inner change is something that cannot be forced. It has to come, there has to be a conviction that there's a need to change. We are like the prodigal son who went off and squandered all his fortune and sunk to the lowest level until he ended up taking care of pigs, right? The swine. And he was so hungry that he even thought of eating the food that the pigs were being given. So sinking to the lowest level sometimes is necessary to wake us up to a need for change. And until we are awakened to a real need for change, it is a struggle. It's like it makes no sense. So we need a conviction that the change is necessary. Such a conviction comes only when we know who we truly are, when we are aware, just like the prodigal son, he knew that he was not that swine. He was not just the guy taking care of the swine. he knew where he came from. So if we know who we are, we know what our purpose is, we know our direction, and we know how we can find our way back, basically. So it's very important to be able to answer those very basic questions in life. Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? You know, and as I said in the talk, what can be helpful for us would be the guiding principles. The idea that that all is one, and that the reason for suffering is our forgetfulness of that oneness, for example. These are, if we can understand that suffering comes from that forgetfulness, we will get more of that conviction that I need to change this because I don't want to keep suffering anymore. Right?
We seem to only learn through pain sometimes, don't we?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's pain that wakes us up.
Makes us change. Yeah.
Yes, and that's why karma is such a great teacher.
Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned, now this is not one of the questions, but you did speak about karma, reincarnation, and universal brotherhood, and not to forget those three in your talk, and because they give you that that big picture, those three, don't they? It's kind of where they go and how important those things are. If people forget, because sometimes along the pathway we might join an organization like the TS, and we go so far down, and then you might forget. Really, you just got to sometimes look back to, well, why did I join? I mean, even looking back to what brought you in to such an organization with this group of people, what were the questions that brought you in? For example, I can remember waking up at 12 wanting to know my purpose in life. And then when I was around 28, 29, I saw the advert in the paper with the Theosophical Society's emblem, and it had, what is the purpose of life? So it's interesting, something remembered, you know, all the way back and took back there. So yeah, I don't think that those signposts are too far away if we have a little look back through our journey and just have a look through. So yeah.
Sometimes we post the question and the universe responds. Yeah. So you wanted to know what the purpose was, and here's the advert that was a response. We attract to ourselves what we need sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. Now tell me, is there any final words that you would like to leave with all our guests, both in New Zealand, in the Philippines, in India? We've had Australia, we've had people from various places.
Well, I was thinking about the three legs of the stool that we speak of in Theosophy: study, meditation, and service. And it is, sometimes we take it for granted, but it is study that allows us to see the big picture, to understand the big picture, to understand our purpose for existence. And that is one really valuable thing we can get from our theosophical studies, a true understanding of what kinship means. Because strange as it may seem, many theosophists don't really understand what is meant by what we call brotherhood or kinship. Is it giving away everything that we have for those who are in need? Does it go deeper? So our theosophical studies are what help us to understand that. the meditation part of it is actually also very important, because we tend to identify with this physical body, our personalities, our emotions, our minds, and we forget that we are that spiritual self. If we can realize that through meditation, then a lot of these problems, so we're speaking about fears, for example, a lot of them will naturally fade away. And finally, the service aspect is what we spoke about in the talk, which is altruism. Altruism, which comes from that true understanding of kinship.
Yeah.
So there's another thing that is a part of our attempts to affect change, which is that at some point, the tamasic tendency or the inertia sets in. And we tend to go back to our old ways when we lose that initial fire to change and make a difference. So the importance of perseverance, and that the importance of the conviction that the change is necessary. We need to keep that always in mind. It helps us to persevere and to keep moving forward. And finally, I just want to round it out, because John Borsmans started this series of Theosophical Sundays with the Golden Stairs. And they are the steps that will take us to the goal. They're the steps to our way back home, basically. So there are many reminders that we could use in our quest for inner change or transformation. And all of these pointers from Theosophy are all good ones, and just very helpful signposts or guides. But in the end, we still have to make the steps, to take the steps ourselves.
That personal effort, isn't it? Ourselves.
Yeah.
It's got to be done. Well, I shall finish things here, and we would like to thank you very much for being part and for rounding off our series very, very deeply and sharing your wonderful learnings and pearls and things with us. So I thank you on behalf of everyone
Very welcome.
that is watching. So yeah, thank you.